Hello guys, today we'll be doing finally the 85mm shootout comparison that I mentioned on my previous video, and we will be comparing the Sigma Art 1.4, the Sony GM 1.4, the Batis, and the newer Sony 85 1.8. So let's get started. So I did different photo shoots for this, partly because the weather was so bad that I could never get this going in one simple comparison, but hopefully the data that I have here will be enough for you guys to at least get an idea of how the lenses compare and which one might work better for you. There's no perfect lens for everybody, so and there's budget considerations and preferences other than that, so all I can do is present the data and then let you guys decide. So first I'm gonna start with the boring charts that I took some pictures of. On this one, the chart was hanging from a waistcoat arm, and the camera was on a tripod. This is an A7R2, so it's not my favorite test, but just for the sake of it, I will mostly consider the center part of it valid in any case. So first of all, here's the Batis here, and then I'll compare it directly to the Sony 1.8. And as you can see, somebody mentioned this to me, and it seems to be right that the 85 Sony is a bit short of 85. And you can see the Batis and Sony. Now sharpness wise, they're very similar. So when you consider the price, it's pretty impressive. And again, guys, at the end, on the description, you'll have a link to download all these files so you can check them out all you want. And then let's compare the Batis to the GM. So Batis GM at 1.4, and then the Sigma 1.4. This is just one sample, and with every test I took several samples of with every lens. So I'm just presenting you the best one of them. The only lens that gave me trouble focusing was the Sigma. I got a lot of inconsistent results, and at first the first copy I have of the Sigma was very weak, so I got a second copy which is better. So this is the one that we've been testing. So again, here we go with the GM, the Sigma. Clearly the GM is sharper, and then the Batis. And then for the sake of curiosity, I took also a photo of the GM at 1.7 to compare to the Sigma. I'm sorry, to the Sony and the Batis at 1.8. So this is the Batis 1.8, GM at 1.7, and Sony at 1.8. As you can see in the letters here, it looks like the GM at 1.7 gets really sharp and up there with the best the Batis can do at 1.8 and the Sony. But enough with this boring charts. Let's go to some of the photo shoots that I did. So let's first start with this one. This one with a model called, her name is Cara McNeil, and the photo shoot was really bad because it was really cold and she was under the weather. I should have waited for Utah weather to finally stabilize, but I really wanted to get this done, so we did our best. So let me show you here a comparison of the lenses, all at their widest aperture. So this is the Batis, this is the GM. Batis, GM, the Sigma, GM, Sigma. Again, the Sigma gave me trouble focusing, so this was the best of all the images that I took. And then the Sony. As you can see, the Sony is very sharp at 1.8 versus the Batis, Sony, Batis. And then let's show you the full image so you can see the advantage of the 1.4 rendering when it comes to background blur and isolation. For example, you got the Batis and then you got the Sony GM. So Batis, GM, Sigma, GM. So it looks to me like the GM has an extra layer to put its own way of isolation versus the Sigma. Just gives a bit more of a blur or 3D look. Let's put it that way. Here we go with the Sony versus the Batis. Sony, Batis, and it's the Sony is really impressive for the price. It's insane how sharp it is, and the only thing you can see a difference in the color rendering, and maybe the Batis has a more 3D look to it. So let's check that, because I have a photo that is really similar between the Batis and the Sony that I thought you guys might be interested to look at. So this photo, you got the Sony here, you the Batis. So the pose is so similar, it's perfect for checking this out. As you can see, there seems to be a lot more skin detail on the Sony than actually on the Batis. But at the same time, once again, you can see that the Sony is not quite 85. It's a bit short of 85. Now when you look at the image in full size, or fit in the window so you can see the whole thing, you can compare how the rendering looks. And again, at least to me, the Batis seems to have an edge when it comes to a bit more 3D pop to the image. But needless to say, the Sony is an impressive lens, and you really cannot go wrong with either one. From other tests that I did, I could tell that the Batis was sharper across the frame than the Sony, at least from this copy. But I mean, impressive. Personally, I prefer the Batis rendering, but hard to go wrong with the Sony. I have another one here. I think I adjusted this one a little bit to match the Sony. Or here, I decided to create another comparison at 1.7 on the Sigma and the GN, so you guys can compare how they all look against the Sony and the Batis. So we have the GN at 1.7, the Sigma at 1.7, and then the Batis and the Sony at 1.8, which is the closest I can get to a fair comparison between all of them. So we will start with the Batis on the first spot, and then the GN at 1.7. So we have the Batis 1.8, the GN at 1.7, Batis, GM, Sigma at 1.7, GN 1.7. So here they look really similar now, and then the Sony. So to check them out in full, Batis, GM, Batis, GM, Sigma, GM, Sigma, and then the Sony versus Sigma, Sony versus GM. And again, you can download all the files and test them all you want, and then make your decision. Let's go to another test that I did. This one was with Trina Jasmine, another great model, very helpful, very friendly, and she helped me with some of the tests as well. So, and this one, we're looking first at the Batis here, and then we have the Sigma. So Batis, Sigma, we got the Sony, Sigma, Sony, Batis, Sony, Batis, and GM versus Sigma, GM, Sigma, GM, Sony, GM. And now let's go to the full rendering so we can see the actual bokeh. So first we start with the Batis, and you can see how the blur looks, the rendering of the foliage on the back, the bokeh balls, and then let's compare to the Sony. Sorry, the Sony here. So Batis, Sony 1.8, Batis, Sony 1.8, which again is a bit shorter than the Batis. You can see the bokeh balls in the back, how the rendering is. In some areas it may look like the Sony is actually a bit softer on the rendering, but it also could be the change on the light on the back, so it's a bit hard to tell, but I don't see a huge difference between the two. I mean, some areas like around here you can see that the Batis is actually a bit harsher or softer depending where you're looking at, so not a big difference to me right now between these two. Now let's look what happens when you go to a 1.4 from the Batis. Big difference. This is a 1.8 background, this is a 1.4 background. I know that on paper sometimes it sounds like it's not a lot, but when you see it like this, it's pretty drastic. And then from the Sigma to the GM, so Sigma, GM, Sigma, GM. You can see a bit rounder. This is all wide open, of course, so the blades are not gonna come into play like it would if I were stopping them a little bit. But you can still see that the GM is a bit rounder, and it's also softer in most areas. But consider how, in my opinion, all Sigma lenses weren't the best at rendering. This is not bad at all. That 135 is actually even better, so they've been improving a lot, but you can still see that the Sony is superior in rendering, softer all around. And then from the Batis to the GM, Batis, GM. To me, the 1.4 just makes everything pops out so much. You can compare how everything here on the Batis looks, and then when you go to the GM, it just, I mean, it's great background blur in my opinion, and I love how it looks. So this will be the test with train adjustment. Let's see what else we have here. I did a quick test at home. So we start with the Batis. It's always very sharp. Then we follow with the GM in this case. So Batis, GN at 1.4. Of course, the Batis looks sharper at 1.8, but the GN at 1.4 is not bad at all. And then we get the Sigma. So GM, Sigma. Clearly the GM is sharper. Sigma, and again I had troubles. In this case I decided to actually keep the glasses to make it a bit harder for the lenses and see what it could do. So now we have the Sony and the Batis. Sony, Batis. Now this background of course has very interesting areas that are complicated for the lenses. For example, you have the Batis here trying to render all these bubbles in the back, and then you have the Sony 1.8. So you can see how they compare, how they each render this. They are similar. Now when you move to the GM, then it's like everything is blurry. So the extra background blurring power of the GM comes into play, and the Sigma actually does a good job here too, but it's just not quite as good. As you can see, it's easier. Now from the Batis to the Sigma, you can still see the extra power of the rendering, but when you compare to the GM, you can see that it's softer than the Sigma, and it's pretty clear in these areas. And here we go for reference, the Sony 1.8 versus the GM, and the Sony versus the Sigma. And the overall image looks like this: Batis, GM, Batis, GM. So as you can see, it's just, to me, the extra rendering, the isolation that the 1.4 gives just makes everything pop. It's just very unique. You can tell right there how everything looks, and the Sigma gives a very similar look, just not quite the separation that I noticed from the Sony GM, at least to my eyes. Maybe you guys see it differently, and please let me know what you think. And then we have the Sony. So Sony versus Batis. Sony versus Batis. Sony versus Batis. Let's see what else I have here. So I showed all those, and I have Mr. Bob on the trash can. So this was a comparison. I just wanted to see the lenses focusing on different areas, not just on the center. So here we start with the Batis. This is the focusing area, so you can see here the mola reflected on the eye. And this is the GM. So Batis, GM, Sigma. So GM, Sigma, clearly not as sharp, and you can tell that the mola is more defined on the GM, and also here you can see the pattern, how it looks a lot more defined on the GM. And then we have the Sony. So Batis versus Sony. Batis, Sony, GM. And how does it look in full size? Batis, Sony, Batis, Sony, GM, Batis, GM, Sigma versus the GM. And I also put a small element here on the front to see if they will render it very differently. So you can see there from the Batis to the GM to the Sigma and the Sony. So it's not very different. Wasn't much of a big deal on the test as I thought it would be. You can see some of the rendering here on the background. See from the 1.8 to 1.4 and then back to 1.8. Not a lot of difference, to be honest, from the Batis and the Sony. In the GM and the Sigma, about the same difference as we've seen before. Now how do they compare on the left side? Here we go. Let's go check focusing on the left side of the frame. This was always within the PDAF area of framing, so I didn't go all the way to the left or to the right of the frame. So we got the Batis still very sharp, as you can see. The GM, the Sigma. We got the Sigma, it's not quite as sharp, and then we got the Sony. So Sony, Batis, and I think here the Batis shows that it's sharper than the Sony. And here we go like this. This is kind of how it looks. So you can see the blur, extra blur that the 1.8 GN gives. The 1.4 GN gives over the Batis, and then the Sigma also gives that extra. And comparing Batis to Sony, Batis to Sony, still always a bit short. Looks like the Sony and the Sigma are similar, which it's common for the Sigmas to always be a bit shorter than stated. The same thing happens with my 135. It's not quite 135, but I can live with it because it's an amazing lens, the 135. And finally, checking on the right side. And this is more of a, I guess, individual test of the particular copies that I have. But anyways, here we go. We got Batis, GM, Batis, GM. On the right side is when my GM is a bit weaker. And then we got Sigma, GM, Sigma, GM, Sony, Sigma, Sony, GM, Sony, Batis, Sony, Batis, and the full size rendering. Here we go. GM, Batis, Sigma, GM, Sony, Batis, Sony. So as you can see, guys, you have a lot of data. You can have all the images to download and compare the samples. and then you can make a decision on which one you like the best. I personally believe that the GM of all the copies that I tested, including the 2 Sigma copies, it was the best. And I will be posting a follow-up video with a quick video clip of all of them focusing using IF, so you'll be able to tell how they behave, particularly the Sigma with the MC11 adapter. You will see the limitations that it has when it comes to autofocusing continuous mode. If you move away from the center, it will start to hunt a little bit, so that limits it a little bit. Besides that, you will be able to see how they follow the eye across the frame. So just look for that video shortly after I finish with this one. Regarding my preference, I decided to take the Sigma Art after getting the 135 because I love big lenses. If I could get the Sigma and sell my GM and save some money, that would have been great. But unfortunately, after testing 2 copies of the Sigma, my GM is not going anywhere. I just love the rendering, love the focusing speed, or how good it is across the frame versus the Sigma with adapter. And overall, I just felt it was a superior lens. Not to say that the Sigma is bad. On the contrary, it's a great lens, and I don't think you can go wrong with either of these lenses. They are just amazing choices that we have for our system. Between the Batis and the Sony, I know there's a lot of people asking about this, and it's a very tough choice. Sharpness wise, as you can see in instances, the Sony actually looks sharper than the Batis. Not away from the center, because I did some extra shots that I tested, like buildings, and definitely the Batis was sharper away from the center. But for portraits, I personally will get the Batis in the sense that I feel that it gives me a little bit more pop to the images. But I also know that there's this really bokeh thing that I actually didn't experience during my shots, which was something I was expecting. So if you can afford the Batis, that will probably be my choice if 85 is my primary focal length, and if you don't want to go for the GM. If 85 is not your main focal length, it will be hard for me to justify spending the extra money on the Batis. I would, because I like the extra 3D rendering, but it's quite a little bit of money that you have to pay extra when you can get the amazing quality of the Sony 1.8. And as long as you get a good copy, I don't see how you'll be sad with that lens. And as you can see from the photo that I was posting before, it's actually the smallest of all of them. So that'll be a nice, imagine a small kit with this, the 35 2.8 or the 55, and you have a really powerful small kit to carry around. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Let me know when you get the files. Give me your opinions on which ones you prefer and why. All I can do is present the data, present the sample images, and then you guys decide which one you like. There's no best lens for everybody. For me, the GM is my choice, but I can see people having arguments to pick any of these awesome lenses. So just make a comment, let me know what you think, let me know what you want to see next. Next video is gonna be just showing you the AF performance of all the lenses, so you can get an idea of what to expect. One thing I wanted to mention I like about the Sony is that it has also the button here, just like the GM, so you can use it for IAF, which is really great. Anyways, let me know, and thank you for watching.